No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Why do people commit themselves to the things they do? Why are people so worried about sport? Why wine? Why video games? I'm Brian Lowry, and in this season of my podcast, Know What You See, I'm asking a simple question, but a really big one. What's the point? In conversations with people with a variety of passions and obsessions, we get the chance to look through a window and see what it means to truly focus on a realm of human experience. Join me on Know What You See. New episodes begin November 26th.
Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Nadia Bolz-Weber. Nadia is an ordained Lutheran pastor, a 3-time New York Times bestselling author, and one of those folks that when you get to sit with her and talk with her, what you get's a real human being who has struggled and grappled with what it means to be a human being who's fully alive, and it's always a delightful conversation. We covered a lot of ground, including Nadia's background in her own grappling with her Christian faith and some of our shared experiences there. Her transition from that sort of dualistic mindset to a more peaceable way about herself, her life in recovery and things that she's learned, as well as things that she's learned about grief and loss, especially around recently her nephew's death. So it's a delightful interview. I hope you enjoy and find it immensely helpful. Enjoy. Just a warning that this episode contains mention of suicide. If you or someone you know is in crisis, you can contact the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Or you can text or call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 or dial 911 in case of emergency. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is the world's largest online provider of therapy, serving over 5 million people worldwide. They offer affordable care with a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists, helping you take your own next steps in your own unfolding story. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/no-small-endeavor to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/no-small-endeavor.
This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting to get your money back, which turned into worrying about getting your money back. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes today and help you get up to a $4,000 refund advance loan fast. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Refund has $0 loan fees and 0% APR. Refund advance loans may be issued by First Century Bank N.A. or WebBank. Terms apply, subject to credit approval.
Nadia Bolz-Weber is an ordained Lutheran pastor, founder of House for All Sinners and Saints in Denver, Colorado, the creator and host of the Confessional podcast, and the author of 3 New York Times bestselling memoirs, Pastrix, Accidental Saints, and Shameless. Welcome, Nadia.
Thanks, Lee.
Nice to see you again.
It's good to see you, too.
Good to have you here in Nashville.
Yeah,
on
pleasure.
Your way. Lecturing down this way.
Yep. I love Nashville.
Yeah, it's a great city.
Really, any excuse to come to Nashville. Yeah.
And you found an excuse to do a little singing while you were in Nashville.
Yeah, last night.
You're into singing.
Oh, that would be an understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was raised in a religious tradition that was a singing tradition, and I think I've realized the sort of almost like mental health benefits of returning to it as often as possible.
Yeah. So we both grew up singing, 4-part a cappella singing. Why do you think singing's been continued to be so important to you?
Nothing else makes me feel the way that makes me feel. And the release of oxytocin and dopamine is unbelievable when you're singing with other people. It's been studied now, and it's so powerful for a sense of well-being, for a sense of connection to people. I've started to get the women in the prison to sing because it can actually help in conflict. Because if you're singing, especially singing in harmony, first of all, you can't sing harmony by yourself. You need other people. And when you sing harmony with other people, it can feel like your bodies are agreeing to something your hearts aren't ready for yet. And that can be a step. So, and also it's our birthright, you know? I mean, I've been thinking a lot about what's been stolen from us during this sort of late stage capitalism, during the time when we think life's never been better because we have so much comfort and convenience. What was the cost of the comfort and convenience? What's been stolen? And, you know, the advent of recorded music and digitized music and the professionalization of music. It used to be really the only kind of entertainment we had was telling stories and singing and maybe drumming. So being able to do things that are really deeply human, that exist outside of commerce and that are sort of our birthright, I think are things we could be prioritizing as a way of working towards wellness. There's a whole industry, $1 billion industry, wellness industry. And none of it has to do with wellness. It has to do with privilege and being pampered and selfish and pawning it all off as a virtue. But to me, wellness is like walking outside, you know, being outside, moving our bodies, eating food made out of food, getting enough physical contact with other people, singing. These are all, even looking at fire has a remarkable effect on our brains. So I think the things that make us most human, because Homo sapiens have existed for 300,000 years, and for 290,000 of them, we were hunter-gatherers. So foundationally, we are not really adapted to live like this. This is all new. It's all very new. And I don't know that our hunter-gatherer ancestors had quite the debilitating levels of depression and anxiety and addiction that we do.
Yeah. For years, we got a wood-burning stove fireplace insert at our house. And so part of my annual rhythm is getting our woodshed filled up.
Beautiful. And
it brings me such serenity.
Because it's human.
Yeah, looking at my full woodshed.
Absolutely.
And then getting ready. We had our first fire of the season this past week.
Right. Most of your ancestors throughout history had that same feeling for doing the exact same work. Yeah,
and it's just remarkable. I haven't thought about it that way. Yeah. But yeah, it's remarkable to think about it that way. Mm-hmm. And certainly with the singing, I mean, we, in Alabama, in our church context, sometimes the singing was literally our entertainment that we would do sometimes on Friday evenings.
Of course, yeah.
And there was a sort of community to it and joy to it that, I haven't found anything that replaces that.
So I do sacred harp singing as often as I can, and I was in Nashville for one night and got some singers together, and last night sang with 7-8 people, and there was this feeling of like, oh my, like after a real banger, like after a great song, like, did you hear what we just created out of our bodies? It's incredible.
Yes.
And I love sacred harp singing because there's no dynamics. It's just full throated.
Yeah.
And if you have a weird voice, better, like it's very anti-excellence, pro-participation.
Any favorite singing memories from childhood?
Most of them were in smaller groups, like not even the church. The church singing was great, but people would come to our house and we'd have Bible study and we'd sing, or our youth group would get together and sing. Yeah. How crazy, a bunch of teenagers get together at someone's house and sing a cappella songs that they all know. You don't even have to hand out song sheets. How beautiful. What a beautiful inheritance.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife tells a funny story about, she grew up in the big city of Nashville. And so the first time she came to our house in Alabama, she came down with several friends we had invited down. And so when she arrived, she walked into our house and we were sitting in the living room singing hymns. So she went and called her dad and she said, "Dad, they're singing hymns." And he said, "Do you want me to come get you?"
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But yeah, great gift. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So you and I were raised in the same Christian tradition.
Yeah.
And, I have, my own experience has been processing both the wounds and the gifts of that.
Amen.
And so what would you say have been some of the gifts, and what have been some of the wounds you've had to process?
Wow. Okay.
We'll just jump right in. But in particular from those early childhood experiences.
It is an extraordinary thing to be raised in community. And I didn't realize during my childhood how unusual it is in America these days to really have such a tight-knit community. So we saw the same people several times a week.
Yeah.
And they would come to our house for devotionals, and we'd share meals, and we went to church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then there was stuff in between. And so just regularly seeing the same people and having them in our lives, just that alone is pretty remarkable. And of course the singing was absolutely extraordinary. It was my first language, truly. Singing a cappella 4-part harmony, I probably could do that before I could speak. And it completely ruined me for all other church music. I have never felt moved by an organ or a band, anything but unadorned human singing. It has never moved me in a way I think it does other people.
Yeah.
But I always feel bullied by the organ, if I'm honest. Like, I'm a theologian in residence at a couple of big churches, like an Episcopal cathedral and a big Presbyterian church, and they have beautiful organs and magnificent music programs. And I mean, as music, it's nice, but I've never experienced it as worshipful in the way I have just a cappella singing.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember just early kind of mystical experiences in 4-part singing, and it was just an incredible sort of thing. And the community piece for me as well. I think that it reminded me of a few years ago. I had preached a sermon at our church here, and afterwards, a lady just took me to task, and I was just mad as hell. And she, she was unfair and unkind and ungracious, and I was just mad as I could be. And I was telling one of my graduate students about it the next week, and his response was, "I sure do envy what y'all have." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "The only way something like that ever happens is you have some sort of community where people care enough about you to fuss at you that way."
Oh, that's a very gracious way to look at it.
It was a fascinating sort of twist on it, But those early experiences of community are remarkable. So what about
we're so codependent with our community that we refuse to call out bad behavior.
Right. Yes.
There's different ways to look at that.
That's right. Yeah, and I was proud that I called her out. With the unacceptable nature of what she had done. What about some of the things that you've had to process?
Well, I want to talk about another thing that I actually realized at some point really formed me as a Christian in a way I didn't realize, and that is so yes, I went to Lutheran seminary and I was ordained in the Lutheran tradition, and Martin Luther coined the term priesthood of all believers, but really the Church of Christ kind of believed in that. It was such shared authority and leadership in a way that I think has also kind of formed me, and something I was really grateful for. Now, having said that, it's the priesthood of all male believers, to be clear. So it was very... I didn't develop my personality last week, right? I was sort of born with it. So it was very difficult to be a very smart girl who was a natural leader and to be raised in the Church of Christ that I was raised in. Because just continually being told overtly, and sometimes in other ways that were more subtle, that women did not have the same spiritual worth or intellectual worth, certainly leadership worth, as men did. And so it was very tricky because, even our Sunday school teachers, once the boys reached the age of accountability, which for us was 12, which you spiritually go off your parents' insurance at that point. And at that point, we had a lot of women who were our Sunday school teachers. And as soon as the boys turned 12, our Sunday school teachers had to be men because a 12-year-old boy had more authority spiritually than a grown woman did. And I just remember sitting there and going, like, how is it that I'm inferior to my male Sunday school teacher when I'm clearly smarter than he is? Like it was very apparent to me. You know what I mean? It's just when my experience of the world came into conflict with what I was told was true, things started really shifting in my life. And so I think when the exclusive use of the male pronoun for God, even though within Scripture there's so much female imagery that can be evoked that's in the Scripture, the mother hen, there's all this stuff, but the exclusive use of the male pronoun has always been, to me, it grates on me. I have no problem with Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I use that male language a lot in my preaching and in my liturgical speech. But when it's exclusive, it's just this subtle message, God is male and you are not. Mm. And it has this impact on the psyche, the developing psyche of young girls, when they never hear women pray out loud in front of men, when you never hear a female voice in the preaching act, and when God is always referred to as the gender you are not, it does have a pernicious effect on the developing psyche of young girls. So, I had some issues when I left, for sure. Yeah.
You left at 16?
16 or 17.
What precipitated that?
I experienced a lot of alienation when I was young because I had a disease that was sort of disfiguring, and I missed a lot of school. And it couldn't really be fixed until the bones in my face stopped growing. And so I looked abnormal from ages 12 to 16. So I had a lot of alienation and didn't experience much. I experienced no sort of acceptance or community in school. And when I went to high school, but what does happen when you grow up like that is it makes you funny. That's what happens. And so when I went to high school, and I met the gay boys in the theater club. They were like the first ones to be like, "Oh my God, you're fabulous." They thought I was hilarious, and they loved me. And it was the first time I experienced that from peers. And so here I have my church saying homosexuality is a sin and you shouldn't associate with people who are gay and all of these things. But the only love and acceptance I experienced was from these boys in the theater program. That really complicated things for me. And so when I had to choose between what I was experiencing to be true in my life and in my body and in my heart and what the church was telling me was true, when I had to choose between those two things, for whatever reason, I chose what I was experiencing. So that was part of it. There was something that happened. I don't want to get into it. I don't want it to hurt anyone, but there was something in our church that involved a young Black woman my age that I just knew was wrong. And that was part of it. And then concomitantly, I had a growing drug and alcohol issue. So that it's surprisingly time consuming. There's not a lot of time to go to church when you're putting quite that many chemicals into your body on a regular basis, I'll be honest.
So then at some point you become a stand-up comic?
Well, I couldn't afford therapy, and so it was the most cathartic option on the table. Yeah.
That has always seemed to me like one of the most terrifying places to put yourself in.
Dude, how in the world have you been a preacher without being a stand-up comic first? It's the best training there is. It is the best you could hope for. It's like, it taught me so much. for whatever reason, it came really naturally. But I had no ambition, you know, not really. I stumbled upon it and I made money at it. And these headliners took me under their wing really quickly.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of easy and fun, and I made some money. Once getting to the next level would take any kind of effort, I just kind of stopped doing it.
Yeah.
But it's great preparation for preaching, because comics tell the truth but tell it slant in some way, right? And I think preachers do that as well. You know, it's a way of telling the truth about something in a short amount of time while everyone's listening. You know.
Yeah.
So, and also, my sermons are about 1,500 words, and it takes me 10 to 20 hours of work to write a 1,500 word sermon. So economy of language is what I learned. Now, if I were to just think about it for a while, have a couple notes on a note card and preach off the top of my head, it would take 35 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's very concise.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people might be surprised who haven't tried it about how much work it takes to be succinct.
Correct. Much more.
Yeah, much more. Yeah. Are there other things that you, looking back, learned from that experience of being a stand-up comic?
Hecklers in church, I can deal with those very readily. Drunks in the back. Actually, that happened at the cathedral. That happened at the cathedral a couple months ago. One of our unhoused friends was in the back and still very intoxicated. And it was a sermon where I did have some very funny stuff at the beginning, and I was saying something about how about driving in Denver, something about the traffic and how bad it was, and how I had witnessed some road rage that was pretty epic the other day, and I was like, "This is what's wrong with Denver." And he goes, "What's wrong with Denver is we need a better quarterback." and then I had a couple more jokes, and he very loudly he goes, "I could see this at a comedy club," and he would out of protest he leaves. It wasn't because I was a woman; I was too funny. So anyway, it did happen,
That's hilarious.
it was disconcerting.
Yeah. I read somewhere that you said you learned honesty in green rooms. There was also a kind of emotional Darwinism in those spaces.
Yeah, it is. It's very competitive on how cutting you can be about the other comics, and it can be good natured and it can be not good natured. Yeah. So if you're in a fragile state in any way, it is really not safe to be in a comedy green room at all.
Yeah.
No.
What do you think with the sort of, I don't know if you use the word fundamentalist for your
I do.
Upbringing. Okay. What do you think? It seems to me that one can react against an experience being raised that way, and yet carry a sort of psychology of that that keeps being persistent.
No question.
At least that's been my experience of myself that I don't necessarily want to admit. But do you relate to that?
Absolutely, 100%. Because when I left the Christian fundamentalism of my childhood, I became an activist and who thought very much the same. Like, you're either with us or against us. And if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And there's good and bad. And we know who the people are. When I was probably 19 or 20 years old, I was involved in an armed land rights battle in northern New Mexico. Okay, so
wait, say that again.
Armed land rights battle in northern New Mexico, in Tierra Maria, New Mexico. Okay, so I wasn't, I wasn't lukewarm. I was not lukewarm. I was getting arrested. I was all in, and you can take the girl out of fundamentalism, but it is a whole different thing to take the fundamentalism out of the girl. And so what I realized eventually, it took a long time, is that I just changed communities. I didn't change the fact that I didn't want to be in something that was extreme anymore. And so that's taken a much longer process. And I had this parishioner at House for All Sinners and Saints who had recently come out of the Church of Christ and was in this space of being really angry. She would see things that people smug Christian content on Facebook from people who were friends of hers, and she'd get angry. And she said, "You don't see angry anymore, like about your upbringing." And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm not." And she said, when did you get free from that?" And I hadn't thought about it till then. But then when I did, I thought, what this kind of mindset gives you is very dualistic thinking. It's that black and white thinking, right? Things are either good or bad, and that's it. And I was free from it, and subsequently then free from the anger that caused it, when I could look back on my Church of Christ upbringing and not view it dualistically. When I could, and that didn't feel like a betrayal of the part of me that the harmful things harmed, right? So that's when I was free. When I could go back and go, actually, the community thing was really beautiful, and the singing was beautiful, and I learned these things. And it didn't feel like, admitting there's something good is an act of treason against the bad parts that hurt me, right? That's when I was free.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I mean, it seems that as defining Christian fundamentalism in kind of the technical sense, that, given certain doctrines or young earth creationism or a certain view of Scripture or whatever the case may be, that Christian fundamentalism defined in that technical sense seems to be on the decline. But if anything, that sort of the way you're describing fundamentalism seems to be on the rise, not just in the Christian world, but in American culture generally.
Yes.
What do you see there?
Well, sin would be this short answer.
The Lutheran is going to have to come back to that answer.
You're not wrong. And I feel like it's very simplistic for me to say that the internet is at fault, but the internet is at fault. I feel like what happened with the internet is, I don't know at the time that we were adopting all of this stuff and thinking it was really great. We have access to information all over the world. We get connected to all these people who have similar interests as we do. And it seemed like, it's connecting us. This is the beautiful. We're more connected than ever. And you fast forward to now, and you realize it has done the absolute opposite. It has severed us from each other into these two silos of thinking, and basically, and the things that I see as at fault in how that happened are abject greed. I think that the way that ad revenue works, you have to have content that spikes dopamine so that people get that fuzzy sort of righteous feeling, and they'll click on it, and then they'll keep doing that. And then you have to increase the rhetoric by about a half a degree each time for them to get a similar bump in dopamine. So it just keeps revving up and revving up and revving up. So now the baseline sentiment, whatever group you're in, conservative or liberal, is so different than the baseline sentiment of conservatives and liberals even 5 years ago. So, and part of it is like we're little dopamine addicts, little rats looking for these pellets in this existential internet maze constantly. And it's extremely profitable. So one is just the greed that's involved in all of the money that's made from the fact that we're addicted to being online. And another factor really is that our drug of choice right now is knowing who we're better than. And so that sort of the human sin of self-righteousness is we have a bolus button for it constantly now. So, that's my sort of Yeah, that's my fairly simplistic answer to that.
Yeah.
But these things aren't going away. I spoke at the Aspen Ideas Festival this year, and Sam Altman was there, the founder of OpenAI, and I heard him speak, and he was just rapturous about how all of the things that are going to be solved from AI, and all of the good that it's going to do. And I kind of rewound to when Facebook came out, and remember we're like, oh, it's so cute. You can like find your friends from high school, and you can see your niece's baby, and she lives across the way. It's like connecting us, and it's free.
Right.
I'm like, some guy offers us something free that seems awesome. Can we collectively just not reach for it? Just take a moment. And we had no way of knowing at that point. So I'm like, okay, well, what were the things that went into the fact that we had this thing that seemed really good when it was offered to us first? What factors were involved in having it be so corrosive? And can we have a caution around AI about those same things, meaning abject greed, the need to know who we're better than, the having to feed the beast of shareholder profits continually at the expense of most of the population. These are things that are operative. So, because here's the thing, greed, shareholder profits, feeding the beast, our need to feel righteous, none of those are going to be solved by AI. But relying on AI, which is created by people who have these problems, we should have some caution around that.
Yeah, Altman and his ilk certainly have these sort of grand messianic visions, don't they?
They do.
And it seems to me, I mean, one of the things that I find frustrating sometimes is the way in which it's presumed in a lot of Western civilization that traditions of theology just don't have anything to teach us.
Oh,
and it's like,
yes,
if the Altmans of the world had a little bit of knowledge of a rigorous doctrine, say of sin,
correct,
then all of a sudden you would have a little more humility, I think, about how all of this could go wrong.
I've written several essays in the last year about exactly that. Precisely that. I was in a day-long meeting at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago talking about that exact thing. Is that because I'm watching Altman and this other guy be rapturous, and then I went to this AI thing later, and he was saying there are about 10 men who have really most of the power and control that are holding the levers around AI right now and around tech across the world. And he goes, but they have advisors. And I was like, my hand shut up. And I'm like, look, I listened to this guy talk, very smart, maybe kind of thinks like a computer, and that's why he's so successful, but probably not the highest level of what we call emotional intelligence. And so what it feels to me, if we're going to use Star Trek as, which we should, is it feels like they're Vulcans. And they're collectively creating data, the AI. And I'm like, who's Counselor Troy?
Yeah.
Who has the emotional intelligence and the spiritual intelligence and what we usually have called wisdom? Is there somebody at the table offering that kind of intelligence to the whole? Because there really should be. Because there was... Oh, God, I could talk for an hour about this. I read maybe 5 years ago in Wired magazine, I read a piece with this guy, Judea Pearl, and I think he might have died since then, but guy in his 80s, but he's considered the sort of grandfather of AI. He was one of the first thinkers that was even going there. And at the end of the interview, it was almost like a throwaway thing. The interviewer said, when will we know that AI is capable of evil? And Judea Pearl said, when it favors one kind of information over another kind of information. In other words, cognitive bias. And I freaked out because about 6 months later, I heard a lecture from a theologian, Simeon Zoll in Cambridge, who defined sin as cognitive bias in a sense, because he's lecturing to at a secular university, trying to teach the history of Christian thought, and his students who aren't Christian, aren't familiar with this, struggle with the doctrine of sin because it feels like you're being judgy, and that really is their only sin. That's the only thing they believe is a sin, right? Just being judgy. And he was saying what theologians have always called sin is hiding in plain sight as what Simeon Zoll calls cognitive bias. And so I'm like, there are people who have studied what it means to be human, and that is what we're studying right now when it comes to AI. Every single science fiction film about the robots taking over, or the robots look like us, and are they human or not? There's so many of these. The basic question is, what does it mean to be human? And if we only have certain types of people answering that question, and they're answering it in a lofty way, we have some problems.
Right.
Because we have always had a way of talking about that in a way that's slightly less lofty, and I would say actually more accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about that a long time. Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you on all of that.
Yeah.
So, shifting back to kind of some of your biography, one of the at what point did you begin to really challenge your own sort of dualistic thinking? What helped you move beyond some of that?
Probably 32 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would say. I mean, you're forced in 12-step work to look at what your part is in any conflict you're having, in any resentment you have towards someone else. And it's very difficult to maintain dualistic thinking when you're continually engaged in a process of going, oh, well, where was I wrong?
Yeah.
So maybe, but it was slow for me. And it's something that just has come with age. And I think that there was some point, and I don't know when it happened, when I realized how drawn I was to dualistic thinking. Like, I love it like chocolate in some ways, and yet how toxic it is for my spirit. Yeah. And even if it's my first inclination, I just realize how bad it is for me. And whether, what other people are going to do, whether they're going to adopt that or not, I have no idea. I know it's very toxic for me. It's corrosive.
Yeah, I'm remembering there's this line from the big book that I've always loved, where I forget the context of it, but it speaks of contempt before investigation.
Contempt prior to investigation.
Yeah. That is so helpful.
Yeah.
And so often what I can be tempted to do.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
But it's this sort of, that line itself is subversive to that sort of dualistic, cataloging everything.
I love asking people, like, is there anything you love now that you used to look down your nose at? That's always a great kind of get to know you question.
That
like,
is great.
What do you embrace now that if your 22-year-old self would be horrified or whatever?
Yeah. You've spoken of the way in which your own addiction has been a sort of gift to you. How do you see that?
Oh, I think maybe it has allowed me to have compassion for people in a way that I might not if I hadn't have had that experience. And subsequently, it's given me a bit of impatience for people who haven't done any personal work, I think. So it's kind of it has a couple edges to it.
Yeah.
But I think that it has allowed me to, like the podcast, I just did it mostly just during the pandemic. I haven't produced that podcast for a few years, but the idea with the confessional was like, come on the podcast and tell me the worst thing you ever did, and we'll have a really compassionate conversation about it. Let the story breathe a little. And then I would listen to our conversation that I had with the person 5 or 6 times, almost Lectio Divina, and then I would write a blessing for them that I would record at the end. So I think knowing my own propensities and the darker aspects of my own heart has given me compassion for other people And, you know, I volunteer as a chaplain in the women's prison. I'm there once or twice a week when I'm in town. And I think it allows me to have this real affection for these women who've done horrible things.
When it does seem to me that with the 12 steps starting from this sort of coming to terms with one's own powerlessness, that one, how difficult it can be to accept one's own powerlessness, but then how liberating it can be when you have some sort of way to go forward.
Absolutely. Right.
And then how tough it is for some who never get to a place of finding their own sort of powerlessness.
Isn't it weird that it came out of America? Because for us, especially, to say you're powerless, are you kidding? We are taught to strive and achieve and reach for things and dream. And I mean,
get up and go and
get up and go. And you know what? I love that about us. I've spent a lot of time in other countries. I really love that American spirit. I think it's really is beautiful, but it has a downside. Yeah. And so the fact that one of the most successful things to ever come out of the United States of America is an anonymous program that has no leader, creates no money whatsoever, and where basically in order to be a part of it, you have to admit failure is incredible to me.
Yeah.
And it's gone all over the world.
Yeah.
It's one of our best exports.
Yeah.
You know? But the powerlessness thing, it is, because the opposite idea is just smeared all over us from every quarter. Because you either have the power of positive thinking people, the you can manifest anything people, or the prayer of Jabez people, or the purpose-driven drivel brokers. I mean, there's a million messages of if you just pray right or think right or act right, you can just have anything you want in your life. And it creates a lot of money for the people who are doling this message out, but it creates a particular type of despair for people who've fallen for it, and it still hasn't worked.
Right. Yep. What did it look like for you to begin to come to terms with your own powerlessness and a sort of recognition that you had to reveal it, let go of it, address it?
With drinking?
Yeah.
Specifically? Well, I grew weary of waking up and not knowing where I was. And it was terrible for my complexion, because I would, not to be too graphic, I would throw up after I'd passed out. And there's a thing about the combination of stomach acid and vodka that I'm just saying, it's terrible for your complexion. So my skin really cleared up after I got sober. But in the big book, it talks about pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I would say it was that. And I had this mighty propensity for self-destruction. And I think now, looking back, I could be wrong, but I didn't know I had much value. I certainly had never achieved anything. I didn't know I was smart. I knew I was funny, and that was it, really. And so when you have a lot of potential as a human and you have absolutely no outlet for it, it can very easily turn to self-destruction. And I think that's part of the story for me. At least that's how I understand it now. And it's very, to do the self-talk in the morning of, okay, today I'm going to get it together. Today I'm not going to drink, or I'm not going to gamble online, or I'm not going to flirt with my married coworker, or whatever it is, or I'm not going to eat chocolate, whatever it is. That self-talk in the morning of, okay, this time, right? This time. And you can add those mornings of resolve up and they will never add to anything but zero. It doesn't.
Yeah.
What happens when your resolve and your will actually isn't enough, then that's what powerlessness is. And so the whole thing is to go, but it doesn't mean you don't have access to power. It's just that it doesn't all come from you. Once again, a real affront to American thinking that you need a power that's greater than you. And so I love the theological non-specificity in the 12 steps. Genius. There's an entry point for everyone. And it was a real debate when they were writing the book, and I'm glad they resolved it the way they did. So just a power greater than yourself, And for me, I love that. That's like the basis of my faith in so many ways, that I feel like somehow we come from God in some beautiful, mysterious way. We do come from God. And while we're here on this world that's so beautiful and breaks your heart in a million ways, we have access to God. We still we're connected. Like when I don't have enough compassion, I have access to compassion because of God. Like I have access to forgiveness and love, that we're so connected to this source that birthed us. And then somehow when we die, we return to it, This is the most basic way I know to say it. And so I get to tap into that when I don't have enough. But it's not my first thing I go to. It's not, just to be clear, it's not my first move, because I am if someone can do it, I can do it, I can do anything, so I usually have to fall on my face and realize I don't have what it takes before maybe even my husband, who is, by the way, is a heathen, who goes, have you prayed about it? And I'm like, oh, wow, I totally forgot it was an option. or he'll say, you either trust God or you don't. And I'm like, that thing. Yeah. Oh, whoops. I tried every other thing again, again.
You've spoken, and I think it was, maybe you had a piece at the 30-year anniversary of your sobriety, in which you said, in the basements of churches, I have learned to pray and learned about grace and learned to say thy will be done more than I ever have in the sanctuaries of churches. And at the same time, were it not for the 12 steps, I doubt I would have ever felt comfortable returning to Christianity, and returning to Christianity 25 years ago has given me what AA alone could not have. Sometimes blessings fold in on themselves like that. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I don't remember writing that. Yeah, I probably had ChatGPT do that. God, it's so true, though. There's a kind of wisdom I get in church basements in these meetings that I don't get anywhere else, that I desperately need. And then there's, they don't have like the Eucharist, and they don't sing hymns in the basement, And there's and I need those things too. So I'm glad I have both.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does feel like people are more readily speaking honestly about their lives. Honestly about their lives, and connecting to God and one another in the basements more than the sanctuaries. Yeah.
I certainly remember the first 12-step meeting I ever went to was with a family member. He took me to an open meeting, and afterwards he said, "What did you think about that?" And I said something like, "I think that's the most honest space I've maybe ever been in."
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, remarkable. You at some point have a call to be a pastor. What precipitates that?
Well, several things, kind of a confluence of several things, I would say. One was when I discovered Lutheran theology, I found it really compelling because it felt like this beautiful articulation of what I'd already experienced to be true. Remember, we talked about how I was experiencing things to be true, and then the church was saying other things were true. So it felt like, getting sober, the big book says we find that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And that had 100% been my experience. And that's what we call grace. And grace is the center of gravity of Lutheran theology. It's not discipleship, it's not holiness, it's grace. So it just was this beautiful fit for me. And I'm so glad I found it. And I'd look around these churches and they were friendly enough if I showed up, but nobody looked like me. Like my friends weren't hanging out there. So that was one reason that I felt like I wanted to go to seminary, because I wanted to be a pastor to my people. But another one had to do with the comedy scene. My friend, a friend of mine who was a recovering alcoholic and a comic, PJ, was just beloved and just sort of wild and charismatic and great. And he struggled with mental illness, and we stood by as we watched him lose that battle. And when PJ died by suicide, our friends kind of looked at me and they were like, "Well, you can do the funeral, right?" And I hadn't been to seminary or anything. I was trying to finish my college degree. I was just the only one in my friend group that went to church. I was just the only religious one in my friend group. And so I did, and it was at the Comedy Works in downtown Denver. And I stand up to do the eulogy, and I look out at this packed room, and it was like comics and alcoholics and academics and queers, and like they clearly had no container for grief or language or structure or liturgy or anything or ritual, nothing. And I looked out and I was like, these people need a pastor, And then I was like, oh, oops. Ooh. Whoa, maybe that's me? I don't know. And so it just several kind of things. And then I found it was during the emerging church movement, so these kind of postmodern Gen X vibe churches that I visited. And I thought, if I could just start a church from scratch, I'd want to do that.
Yeah.
So I did House for All Sinners and Saints, which I served for 11 years before leaving. And I've been gone 6.5 years.
Yeah. When you look back on those 11 years, what are some things that stand out to you that you learned?
Oh, it was so beautiful. We sat in the round, and it was a cappella. And all these old Church of Christ hymns you couldn't sing at my parents' church anymore because they started doing praise and worship choruses. You could do at House for All Sinners and Saints with the drag queens, We loved them. I don't know, man. I honestly look back at those years with wonder and gratitude and like, I can't believe I got to be part of something that was so beautiful and fun and hilarious. And it impacted so many people's lives. And then sometimes I look back, kind of like when you're raising your kids, you see little pictures of your kids as toddlers and you're like, oh, they're so cute. And then you're like, was I present enough to how beautiful that time was when it was happening, And so I sometimes I have that feeling as well, but I think I learned that sometimes the Spirit just kind of spreads her wings and makes something beautiful and then flies away, and we're left going, how were we changed and what does it matter? And I don't know, it felt like something I got to be carried along with, and I'm really grateful.
What led to a closing of that chapter?
I've like the honest answer. Okay,
sure. Well, whichever
okay,
answer you want to give.
No. I'll do the honest one. There were a few things. I didn't want it to have founder syndrome. So I started talking about my departure the first year of the church. And so many people came in and out of that church. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. There were so many young people and people who, didn't have very stable lives, so people were kind of in and out. And we would have a welcome to house brunch quarterly, and there'd be 30 people each time, 30, 40 people, and so many visitors. And anyway, I was like the hostess, and I welcomed everyone who came in, or I tried to. But I was very aware that my ability to welcome people was not because of my innate personality. My ability to have somebody walk in the door of the church, say hi, ask them about themselves, welcome, invite them in to be part of the life of the church, introduce them to people. That's not my personality. I don't care. I mean, just as a person, there's no way I couldn't care about that many people, but it wasn't fake. And what it felt like is it was provision. I felt like God provided what God's people in that community needed through me. And I got hooked up. So I didn't have to fake it. It wasn't a strain. And I knew it wasn't just me. And we had a retreat, a spring retreat, and there were probably 30 people there I didn't know. And I thought, for the first time, I was like, oh, I do not want to ask them about themselves. And then I was like, oh, okay. Like, it felt really important for me to pay attention to that. It felt like the provision had passed. And that was my sign that it is probably time. Because I don't pretend things well. And I didn't want to be in a position where I was having to fake it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I was reading something, somebody was making the case this week that authenticity is not simply allowing whatever pops up in one's mind or whatever chance happens to throw in one's path or out of one's mouth, but that it pertains to a sort of commitment to or choice about what you want to bring forward. And I hear that. I hear that with you. So like, that your kind of inner self. It's exhausting to try to care for that many kind of people, right?
Right.
We're not made for that or evolved for that. But you can still kind of show up for a given season of life and be present to people in that way. And that is a form of authenticity, or real authenticity. And then when it passes, you can say, okay, I think now another season. Have you had any second guesses about moving into another season?
Leaving the church? No. No.
That always seems like a good sign.
No, it was time. It was just time.
So, your book, Shameless, I do want to ask one question about that, if I may. How do you, well, let me be autobiographical a moment for myself to set up the question. I think that one of the things that I experienced as a boy was a lot of deep shame around sexuality. And clearly all the work that's been done on purity culture, it hits young women harder than it does guys. But I can say from my own experience, it definitely can ruin guys too.
They weren't unscathed.
And it really messed me up in some significant ways. And so I think that, even into my 40s, I started dealing with a lot of the kind of unhelpful theological stuff I got as a kid as an undergraduate in seminary, PhD work, lots of really intense opportunities to work through that stuff intellectually. But I think it was kind of psychologically, emotionally, it took me well into my 40s and, doing therapy around a lot of that stuff to kind of begin to let go of that. But what, from your perspective on that, what do you see as kind of central, maybe even not correlating it with sexuality, what do you see as central to helping someone come to a place of where they're not so riddled and burdened by shame, toxic shame?
I think I have this friend she's probably 15 years older than me, and she has none of that. And being close friends with her for especially the period in my life I was, my late 30s, early 40s, was really formative for me because I got to see what that looked like. And so I think that for me, that helped. I had to, Shameless for me, it was a pastoral letter to my congregation, even though it's not stated that that's what it was. I spent 1.5 years asking them. I did interviews for 1.5 years with anyone who would talk to me, and I was shocked how many people immediately said they would. Immediately. I thought, oh, nobody's going to want to do this, but that was not the case. And I asked the same questions. I said, what message did you receive from the church about sex and bodies and desire and gender and whatnot? What message did you receive? How did that message affect you? And how have you navigated your adult life since then? And it was a very intense 1.5 years. And I ended up I'm naturally wired as a fairly angry person, if I'm honest, but my anger after 1.5 years of hearing those stories was big because I knew it was a fraction of the whole and that there was so much out there, and that the sort of sexual flourishing of these people was nipped in the bud in a way, never allowed to actually happen, that even just their own relationship to their sexual response system, the way their bodies naturally, made, had been severed from this. And I got really, really, really angry. And so for myself and for the people who I know who have untangled some of this stuff, it doesn't have to be my book. There's several out there, but anything that can kind of go, there's actually another way to see this. And it doesn't have to be some libertine, secular view that sounds good, but you're kind of left going, I don't know, that feels kind of to me. So for me, finding something that was still a way of viewing all of this that was still connected to my original symbol system and the texts of Christianity was very helpful for me. And then also, I'm not sure how else to answer that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. You've had another recent significant turning point with the death of a nephew. Are you open to sharing some about that?
I'll try. He was like very much like me. I think we're the only addicts in our family, and it happened very young for him as well. And he died as a result, and he was actually shot and killed 2 years ago. And I don't want to go into the details, but it has been, I will never get over it, which I feel fine with, because my sister will never get over it, and we're really deeply connected. And I feel like it's the thing that's changed for me is I read the news differently, if that makes sense, because I know how much sorrow and destruction that this one thing caused in our life. This one 23-year-old boy died, my sister's child. Him and my daughter are 10 months apart. He was a baby in a sling that she was held in a sling in the room when my daughter was born. And the four of our kids are like a little pack. So losing Henry is just ripped something out of our lives. And there's no sewing it back up. And that's one kid. And I know how the incident was reported in the news and how it told you nothing of the truth. Nothing of the truth. And certainly nothing of the sorrow. And that's one kid. And so every time I see a news story where someone dies, I'm like, that represents an entire family destroyed. And how cavalier we are about reporting these things or having opinions about them or assuming that what we're reading is true. You know, all of it. I just feel like this one situation in this one family, and I can't read the news the same.
Yeah. Given your life history, experience, story, you've clearly had to learn to deal with grief a long time ago. But are there particular new insight, new depth, new wisdom out of this own particularly acute grief that you've had to carry now?
All I know is what my sister has said to me, which is that she was very irritated by people sending flowers. She didn't want any flowers. There were too many they have a tiny house. There were too many casseroles. None of that mattered to her. Everyone's different. For some people it does, right? But she said the only thing that mattered were people that were willing to cry with her and have a little humility and curiosity, and that was it. That's all she wanted. And I still cry with her. It's still like the sorrow of it. Just, I don't see it ever going away. And so for her, she wanted maybe a little curiosity and a little humility, because people will be like, oh, I bet it's really hard in this way. People will try and perform their compassion by filling in the blank and going, oh, I bet you feel like this. Mm-hmm. And she didn't find that helpful. So I'd never heard somebody say that before. And I probably had done that a lot to try to show I'm trying to be empathic, you know? Right. So, but she said just the fact that I just kept asking her, what does today feel like? What's hard today, you know?
Yeah.
And letting her answer that honestly, you know? It's very hard. Grief is disfiguring. And it's understandable that people don't want to get too close to people who are in it, you know? I get that. And subsequently, I feel very comfortable around people who are grieving. And God sends them to me in the weirdest ways. I walked the Camino in the spring, and there was a woman and her husband, and they were carrying their 5-year-old's ashes with them, 500 miles to throw them in the sea. And she was one of the only pilgrims I found myself really wanting to spend time with. So I think it's just, you're so stripped down that I just find whatever experience they're going through to be so stripped down and so human that there's no pretense to it. And I find that relaxing, you know.
Was your walking the Camino part of grief for you?
Well, I've done it twice. I did it by myself. Yes. Right after he died, I tried to take care of my sister, and we went and cleaned out his apartment for her. Eric and I did, and drove his possessions and his dog to her in Indiana from Arizona. And I did a little eulogy at his funeral and stuff. I just took care of everything I could think to take care of. And then I left. Maybe 3 people knew I left. And I went to Spain. I walked for 500 miles. A handful of people knew I was there. Part of it was like, I couldn't be like Nadia Bolz-Weber for anyone.
Yeah.
During that time. So, but then I walked it. So I walked out of grief into 2021, and I walked in the spring out of gratitude. It was my honeymoon. Yeah. So, very different.
Couldn't be Nadia Bolz-Weber for anyone. What has been your relationship with being Nadia Bolz-Weber been?
Yeah. It's very weird when authenticity is your personal brand.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's a real trap. It's like, good luck. So I do try to be real. You know, I'm not a terribly affected person, but and at the same time, I'm really offering people part of who I am. It's not the whole, you know, and I can do it, and I'm happy to do it. And my gosh, I'm honored that I get to be a person for a living. That's basically it. And there are times when I know I can't, you know, where I have to sink into the part that's not public. And the parts that I sink into that aren't public, just to be clear, that they don't contradict the part of me that is public. It's not like things I would be ashamed, you know, or anything like that. It's that I have a very small, simple, happy life at home, and that I really protect, you know.
Yeah. It seems like that. Having those sorts of spaces is crucial, I think, to living. It seems like, What's next for you?
No. I've always been really driven and entrepreneurial and starting things. You know, Rachel Held Evans and I started a conference together, and I started a podcast, and I started a church, and I just always have these big projects. And I'm at the point in my life where every time I've thought of a big project, I've kind of gone, I feel like that would really cut into the time I spend cooking and walking in the park.
Yeah.
So I have not for a few years now had any big projects. Although I might put together a tour. I might go on a tour of red states and just host revivals. I want to do tent revivals. Maybe not intense. They might not be intense, but
what would that look like?
Our country's so divided, and I know that a lot of people felt really devastated by the results of this election. And I think I want to just show up and be like, you know what? There's so much more in life that's more real than that, and is still very good. And I just don't want people to give in to despair. And I understand why they would, but I have found if I don't read things on the internet, I'm not filled with despair. I mean, when Jesus was like, you know, you're talking about worry, you know, why do you worry? Why are you worrying? And then he talks about the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. I don't think that's by accident, because like if I'm perseverating about something that I'm afraid might happen, the last thing I'm going to notice around me is if birds are singing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because I'm in my head.
Right.
And so to me, it really is this call to being really present to what is actually happening, not what I'm afraid might happen. And what's interesting is evolutionarily, they've discovered that listening to bird song lowers your cortisol levels. And it makes sense because when we were hunter-gatherers, like if birds were singing, it meant no large predators were around, right? So our bodies really are attuned to things like this. And so I don't know. One of the reasons I love the Gospels specifically are just, and Scripture in general is just, it feels like endless reservoir of meaning, that there are new things to discover, like discovering what it quote means at any given moment is a thrill. This is why scriptural literalism just kills it. It's just like sucking all the life. It's just like a vivisection. It's like taking all life and vitality out of scripture, because I'm like, it's a living word. And that is why I love it, So even a text like that, like consider the lilies and the birds, has a different meaning to me now that I'm so obsessed with like neuroscience and anthropology than it did 2 years ago when I wasn't thinking about those things,
Yeah, there's a difference between consider the lilies, get out of your head and pay attention versus just be present.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
I mean, it's more than just like, hey, literally birds are better at trusting God than you.
You're right.
I mean, that's fine. And there are times when that's the word,
Yeah. So last question for today. You've used the word wisdom a number of times, or at least alluded to that concept a number of times. What are some favorite aphorisms, slogans, bits of wisdom that
I've never known what that word means. What is aphorism?
Short wisdom saying.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
What are some short wisdom sayings?
I mean, I just want to get the definition right, because suddenly I'm doing a limerick, Okay.
So what's some of that continues to be important to you on a daily basis or seasonally basis?
No, I know what it is. I have a teacher named Suzanne Stabile, and she teaches Enneagram.
Yeah,
and
I know Suzanne.
You know Suze, yeah. And she's taught me these discernment questions that I use pretty much every day of my life, which are so simple, which is what's mine to do and what's not mine to do. And what's mine to say and what's not mine to say. And then the third one's tricky. It's because it feels harsh, like what's mine to care about and what's not mine to care about. It doesn't mean it's not worthy to be cared about by someone, but I can't care about all the things, like nobody can. So it's really helped me be grounded and clear, because especially when you're a public figure, people will tell you what they think is yours to do and what's yours to say. Why aren't you using your platform to speak out about X, or people who think if they somehow figure out what my email address is, that I owe them a response. And my email address, there's a reason you can't find it, right? So if somehow you find it, it actually doesn't mean that I then owe you something, right? So it can feel harsh, but it has kept me sane to really check in with myself. And through doing that for years, I end up really knowing when something is mine to do. I can feel it. And I can immediately feel when something's not mine to do. Oh, but I'm tempted to say yes because it'll look good if I say yes, right? Or people will think something will consider me to be X if I say it, right? There's all these tricky little whisper in your ear reasons, when really I know as soon as I see it, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
It's not mine, you know? So, man, those help me all the time.
Yeah. Been talking to Nadia Bolz-Weber. Nadia, thank you so much. Lovely to be with you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thanks for telling me what aphorism means. It's a real takeaway.
Hey there. Did you know that we have a newsletter? Just imagine if you could have one of your favorite ethics professors send you a list of things to reflect on, think about, practical actions with which to experiment, all on your way to sorting through what it might mean to live a good life. Well, that is the NSC Notebook. I riff on themes and topics related to the show and our guests. Sign up for my NSC Notebook today at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriet Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.